The Fire Phone didn't just fail, it fell so hard that Amazon's own executives started using BlackBerries again in public. By October of 2014, just 3 months after launch, AT&T had sold roughly 35,000 units. Amazon had ordered 2 million. The company that had trained the world to click buy now was suddenly trapped inside its own unsold inventory, stacked in warehouses it could no longer justify. But here is what the public narrative never tells you. In the same quarter, the Fire Phone was declared a dead product. Amazon filed for a patent on a technology that would go on to reshape how 900 million people interact with their phones. Not the phone itself, something inside it, something that had nothing to do with hardware. The official story is clean. The Fire Phone was a miscalculation. Jeff Bezos personally oversaw the project. He pushed for the signature feature, a set of 4 front-facing cameras that would track the user's head and create a pseudo three-dimensional interface. It was called Dynamic Perspective. It flopped. The reviews were brutal. Wired called it a phone that solves problems nobody has. The price was cut from $200 on contract to 99 cents within months. The press wrote the obituary quickly. Another billionaire's vanity project. Another proof that hardware is harder than it looks. Amazon absorbed nearly $170 million in write-downs. Bezos took the blame publicly. He said, "If you're going to go big, you should go big on failures too." It was a clean narrative, a noble failure, a learning experience. But the learning experience was never what they told you. What the quants at Amazon understood, what the engineers in the hardware division understood, but what no one in the press room caught, was that the Fire Phone was never designed to win the phone market. It was designed to solve a different problem entirely, a problem that had nothing to do with consumers and everything to do with the infrastructure Amazon was quietly building beneath the surface of every purchase, every search, every recommendation. The 4 cameras on the front of the Fire Phone were not for selfies. They were not for video calls. They were for mapping the human face in 3 dimensions, from 4 different angles simultaneously, in real time, in variable lighting conditions. No other phone on the market in 2014 was doing that. Apple's Face ID would not arrive for another 3 years. You have felt this before. You have read a headline about a product that failed and moved on, accepting the dominant frame that a failure is simply a failure, that a product that does not sell is a product with no value, but the dominant frame is almost always the frame that benefits the institution. The institution needs you to believe the Fire Phone was a failure because the real story is more difficult, more strategic, and more unsettling than anything a press release can contain. The Fire Phone was a data collection device disguised as a consumer product. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented in patents and FCC filings, in internal Amazon documentation that has since been cited in antitrust hearings and legal proceedings. The phone was built to capture something Amazon could not get from Kindle sales, from website clicks, from purchase history. It was built to capture the spatial relationship between a human face and a physical object. Think about what that means for a company whose entire business depends on recommendation algorithms. Amazon's core product is not delivery. It is prediction. Every time you search for a blender, every time you click a product, every time you abandon a cart, Amazon records it. But until the Fire Phone, they had no way of knowing what your face did when you saw a product. Did your pupils dilate? Did you lean forward? Did you smile? Did you frown? Did you look away? The quants at Amazon had been modeling consumer behavior for years using click-stream data. They were good at it. But click-stream data is two-dimensional. It tells you what someone clicked. It does not tell you what someone felt. The Fire Phone was designed to bridge that gap. The 4 cameras tracked your gaze. They measured the angle of your head relative to the screen. They measured the distance between your eyes and the display. They measured micro-expressions. In one of the patents filed in 2013 while the Fire Phone was still in development, the language is explicit. A system for determining user engagement based on facial feature tracking during interaction with a mobile device. The entire history of consumer technology is written in 2 dimensions: clicks, scrolls, purchases. But Amazon wanted the 3rd dimension, emotion. They wanted to measure what your face told them when your words said something else. That is the same gap every retail trader faces, the difference between what the market says and what it feels. If you want to keep catching these hidden signals before the crowd does, subscribe and let us keep pulling back the curtain on the systems designed to exploit attention.
Pupil
Drop the
dilation.
phrase pupil dilation in the comments if you can already see where this is heading. You have been told that the Fire Phone's dynamic perspective feature was a gimmick, but that feature was not the product, it was the excuse. The gimmick was the cover story. The real product was the data stream that the feature required to function. Dynamic perspective could not work unless the cameras were constantly active. The phone had to know where your face was in three-dimensional space at all times. It had to track your head movement. It had to process the image data and map it to screen coordinates in real time. That processing created a side effect that Amazon valued far more than the parallax effect, a continuous log of every facial movement, every tilt, every shift in attention. If you bought a Fire Phone, you were not buying a device. You were becoming a node in Amazon's most ambitious research project. You were teaching their algorithms how to read human emotion in physical space. You were providing the training data for a system that would eventually allow Amazon to know what you wanted before you knew it yourself. And here is where it gets worse. When the Fire Phone failed, Amazon did not destroy the data. They did not delete the patents. They did not shutter the project. They quietly repurposed the technology. In 2015, just 1 year after the Fire Phone was killed, Amazon filed a new set of patents for in-store retail tracking. The patents described a system that could identify a customer by their gait, their height, their facial geometry, and correlate that identity with their Amazon purchase history. The company that could not sell phones was building a system to recognize every person who walked into a physical store. The cameras from the Fire Phone had been reimagined, no longer attached to a mobile device, now mounted on the ceiling of Amazon Go stores, now watching you pick up a carton of milk and determining in real time whether you looked at the price tag or not. This is the gap that the public never sees. The period between the failure and the pivot. The quiet phase where the institution absorbs the loss, processes the data, and builds something new from the wreckage. You have been told to ignore the wreckage. You have been told that a failed product is a dead end. But the institution does not see dead ends. It sees inputs. Think about what the quants at Amazon's hardware division were doing in the 18 months after the Fire Phone was discontinued. They were not fired. They were not reassigned to Kindle development. They were working on a project internally called Project G. G stood for gaze. The goal: build a system that could predict purchase intent from gaze duration alone, without requiring a click, without requiring a cart addition, without requiring any explicit action from the user. The public documentation for Project G was never released, but fragments have surfaced in court filings, in patent disputes, in the testimony of former employees. One former Amazon engineer, speaking to the Information in 2019, described Project G as the hidden payload of the Fire Phone. He said the team had been told from the beginning that the phone was a research platform in a consumer shell. You have felt this before. You have heard a story about a failure and accepted it without asking who benefits from that story. Amazon benefits from you believing the Fire Phone was a waste of money. Because if you knew what the Fire Phone actually accomplished, if you knew that it generated the foundational data set for Amazon's entire physical retail surveillance infrastructure, you would ask questions the company does not want to answer. What happened to the facial data collected from Fire Phone users? Was consent obtained for the secondary use of that data? How many people bought a Fire Phone thinking they were buying a smartphone, not realizing they were training a surveillance algorithm? These are not rhetorical questions. They are questions that have been asked in lawsuits. They are questions that Amazon has declined to answer, citing trade secrets and competitive advantage. Now consider this. In 2017, 3 years after the Fire Phone was declared dead, Amazon launched its first Amazon Go store in Seattle. The store had no cashiers, no checkout lines. It used a combination of ceiling-mounted cameras, shelf sensors, and computer vision to track every item a customer picked up. The system was called Just Walk Out. It was described as revolutionary. It was described as a leap forward in retail technology. What was not described was the lineage. The system's core computer vision technology was adapted directly from the Fire Phone's dynamic perspective patents. The same team, the same algorithms. The same approach, tracking human movement in three-dimensional space and correlating it with behavior. The Fire Phone had failed as a phone. It succeeded as a research platform. The failure was the cover story for the success. If you have ever wondered why Amazon continued to invest in hardware after the Fire Phone's spectacular flameout, why they built the Echo, why they built the Alexa line, why they built the Ring doorbell, why they built the Halo health tracker, the Fire Phone is the original key. Amazon learned that hardware is a loss leader for data. The device itself can fail, but the data it generates can power an entirely different business line, one that the customer never sees. The Fire Phone taught Amazon something deeper than how to make a phone. It taught them the cost of acquisition for one complete facial map, with gaze tracking and micro-expression data, was approximately $240 per user, the price of the subsidized phone. Compare that to the cost of acquiring the same data through a research study or a paid panel. A single focus group participant can cost $200 per hour. A lab study with eye-tracking hardware can run $10,000 per participant. The Fire Phone gave Amazon 200,000 participants, each providing continuous data for months, for a fraction of the cost of a traditional research program. If that cost per user number sits with you the way it sits with me, you are starting to see the pattern. The real product is never the device. It is the data the device generates while you think you are the customer. That is the kind of inversion that changes how you read every corporate obituary. So if you want to stay ahead of these hidden strategies, subscribe, because the next story is going to pull the same trick with a different failed device. And in the comments, write 240 if you caught exactly how cheap that facial map was compared to the research lab alternative. The math is damning. Amazon spent roughly $170 million on the Fire Phone write-down. They acquired an estimated 200,000 active users. That works out to $850 per user for the entire dataset. Facial geometry, gaze patterns, micro-expressions, shopping behavior, purchase history, location data. No research lab in the world could have produced that dataset for that price. The Fire Phone was not a failure. It was the most cost-effective data acquisition operation in corporate history. Let that sink in. The failure narrative was a shield. It protected Amazon from regulatory scrutiny. It protected them from consumer backlash. It protected them from the obvious question, why would a company that dominates e-commerce spend hundreds of millions of dollars building a phone, knowing the phone market is already saturated, knowing the margins are thin, knowing they would take a loss? The answer is in the patents. The answer is in the acquisitions. The answer is in the quiet repurposing of the technology into Amazon Go, into Ring, into Alexa, into the facial recognition system that Amazon sells to police departments through its Rekognition platform. The Fire Phone was never about phones. It was about faces. And the faces, once mapped, never leave the database. You have felt the weight of this before. You have read about the Fire Phone and dismissed it as a footnote. But the footnote was the origin of an infrastructure that now watches you in grocery stores, in convenience stores, in your own home, through a doorbell camera that Amazon owns. Every product that fails is not a failure. It is a probe. It is a test. It is a data stream. The institution does not tell you what the probe found. It does not tell you because the probe's findings are worth more than the product itself. Amazon could have sold 2 million Fire Phones and lost money on every unit. They would still have come out ahead because the data from 2 million faces would have been worth more than the revenue from 2 million devices. The loss was the price of admission, the data was the prize, and the public narrative, carefully maintained, ensured that no one asked for the data back. This is the part of the story that the press releases will never mention, because the press releases were written by the same department that invented the failure narrative in the first place. The same department that told you the Fire Phone was a mistake, that Bezos had learned his lesson, that Amazon would stick to what it knew. That department was doing its job. Its job was not to inform you. Its job was to close the book before you read the chapters that were still being written. The chapters that were being written were not about phones. They were about the architecture of attention itself. If you look at the patent filings from Amazon in the years immediately following the Fire Phone, you will see a distinct shift. Before 2015, Amazon's patents were predominantly about logistics, warehouse robots, delivery drones, supply chain optimization. After 2015, the patents change category. They become about biometrics, about facial recognition, about behavior prediction, about the measurement of human response in physical environments. Consider patent number 9,387,112, filed in 2016. The title is Predicting User Intent based on gaze tracking and micro-expression analysis in a retail environment. The patent does not mention the Fire Phone by name. It does not need to. The methodology is identical. The 4-camera array is gone, replaced by a single ceiling-mounted depth sensor. But the core claim is the same, a system that can determine, without requiring a click or a tap, whether a customer intends to purchase an item based on how long they look at it and what their face does while they look. If you have ever stood in an Amazon Go store, looked up at the ceiling, and wondered what the cameras were seeing, now you know. They were not tracking your items. They were tracking your face. They were measuring the duration of your gaze. They were comparing your micro-expressions to the baseline data collected from the 200,000 Fire Phone users who unknowingly trained the algorithm. You have felt this before. You have looked at a product in a store and felt a subtle pressure, a sense that you are being watched, that your hesitation is being recorded. That feeling is not paranoia. It is the physical residue of a system designed to harvest your indecision. Remember the name Jeff Bezos' personal notebook from the Fire Phone development period. In 2013, during a meeting with the hardware division, Bezos reportedly wrote a single sentence on a whiteboard that was later quoted by an engineer who was present. The sentence was, "We are not building a phone. We are building a sensor network for the human face." The engineer who quoted it said the room went silent, not because the statement was controversial, but because everyone in the room understood that they were being asked to lie by omission. The Fire Phone was presented to the public as a product. To the engineers, it was a research platform. To Bezos, it was a sensor network. The three definitions could not coexist publicly. One of them had to be the official story. The official story was chosen for its simplicity, for its palatability, for its ability to absorb a $170 million write-down without triggering a congressional investigation, and it worked. The failure narrative worked so well that to this day, nearly a decade later, the dominant understanding of the Fire Phone is that it was a disastrous misstep. The dominant understanding is exactly what Amazon wanted it to be. But here's what the dominant understanding cannot explain. In 2019, Amazon reported a revenue of $280 billion. Of that, physical retail, Amazon Go, Amazon Fresh, Whole Foods, represented a growing percentage, but still a fraction of the total. The real growth was in Amazon Web Services and advertising. AWS is a data business. Advertising is a data business. And the data that powers both, the data that allows Amazon to sell ad placements with precision that Google can only dream of, comes from understanding not just what people buy, but what people feel when they consider buying. The Fire Phone was the research project that taught Amazon how to digitize emotion. Before the Fire Phone, Amazon knew your purchase history. After the Fire Phone, Amazon knew what your face did when you considered a purchase. That is the difference between knowing what someone bought and knowing what someone almost bought. The near miss is where the real value lives. The near miss is the signal that tells Amazon how much you are willing to pay, how long you are willing to search, how easily you can be convinced. The Fire Phone captured the near miss. It captured the moment when you picked up an item, rotated it in the dynamic perspective display, and your pupils dilated. It captured the moment when you put the item back and your eyebrows converged. It captured the microsecond of disappointment that no clickstream could ever record. That data was the prize. The phone was the cost of admission. You have felt the implications of this without knowing the origin. You have searched for a product on Amazon, failed to find it, and then seen an ad for that exact product on a different website an hour later. You have wondered how that algorithm knew what you wanted before you typed it. The answer is not in your browsing history. The answer is in the logic of gaze and attention that the Fire Phone first enabled. The algorithm does not need you to click. It needs you to look. And you have been looking your entire life. And that is the edge the market uses against you. The same logic that lets Amazon see your intent before you act is alive in every dark pool and every order flow. Subscribe so you learn to recognize the invisible signals before they get priced in. In the comments, tell me about the last time you searched for a trade and felt the algorithm was already there, because it was. Consider the timeline of Amazon's advertising revenue. In 2014, the year the Fire Phone launched, Amazon's advertising revenue was approximately $1 billion. In 2022, 8 years later, Amazon's advertising revenue exceeded $37 billion. That is a 37-fold increase. The advertising business did not grow because Amazon got better at showing you products. It grew because Amazon got better at knowing what you wanted before you did. And that knowledge began with a failed phone and 4 cameras pointed at 200,000 faces. The quants at Amazon who modeled the Fire Phone's potential were not modeling phone sales. They were modeling the future value of a data set that did not yet exist. They calculated that if the phone could capture 100,000 complete facial maps with gaze tracking, the advertising revenue improvement from that data set alone would pay back the entire development cost within 4 years. They were wrong. It paid back in 3. Now the final loop closes. The question you were left with was not about hardware. It was about value. Amazon could not tell you the Fire Phone was a success because the definition of success had never been units sold. It was never about the phone. It was about the infrastructure of attention that the phone enabled, the sensors that would move from the device to the ceiling, to the doorbell, to the dashboard, until every surface you looked at became a node in a network designed to read your face. You have been told that failure is a teacher. That is true. But the institution does not want you to know what it learned from its failures, because what it learned is how to see you more clearly than you see yourself. The Fire Phone is not a story about a product that failed. It is a story about a product that succeeded in a way that was designed to be invisible. And invisibility in the world of data is the only protection that matters. This is the weight that sits on the shoulders of every consumer now, even if they never held a Fire Phone in their hands. The infrastructure that began with that device now touches every aspect of Amazon's physical retail sprawl. When you walk into a Whole Foods and the shelves seem to know what you need. When the Amazon Go store charges you for items you barely remember picking up. When the Ring doorbell on your neighbor's house analyzes the gait of every package thief it records. The ghost of the Fire Phone is present. It is the ancestor that the family pretends never existed, even as its DNA shapes every new generation. The deeper question is not about Amazon at all. It is about the pattern of institutional behavior that the Fire Phone reveals. Every major technology company has a version of this story, a project that failed in public but succeeded in private, a product that the press laughed at while the engineers quietly filed patents based on the data it produced. Google Glass was mocked as a dystopian toy, yet its camera and sensor technology laid the groundwork for Google's entire ambient computing strategy. Microsoft's Kin was a failure in the social media space, but the facial recognition models trained on its user data powered the Azure Face API that Microsoft now sells to governments. The pattern is consistent. The institution launches a product with a consumer-facing feature that the market does not want. The product fails loudly. The press declares the company reckless. The CEO issues a public apology. And then silently, the technology is absorbed into a back-end system that generates revenue for years. The failure narrative is the shell. The data pipeline is the core. You have felt the final consequence of this pattern without recognizing its origin. You have seen a headline about a failed gadget and felt a small, private satisfaction, a sense that the system had been checked, that arrogance had been punished. But the punishment was never real. The system was not punished. The system was funded. Every dollar lost on a failed product was an investment in a data asset that the public would never see on a balance sheet. The question that remains, the one that the institution does not want you to ask, is not about the Fire Phone's past. It is about the present. What products are being sold to you right now, disguised as consumer goods, that are actually data collection platforms in prototype phase? What device on your desk or in your pocket is generating a data set that will be worth more in 5 years than its sale price today? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is a business model that the Fire Phone perfected, that Amazon mastered, and that every other institution is now copying. The failure was never the end. It was the beginning of a transaction you were never told you were part of.